this opportunity to engage. Before we get to the session and the presentations, I want to stress the importance of creating a safe space for discourse and engagement. Please be respectful at all times, maintain professional conduct, and any form of discrimination and harassment or inappropriate behavior will not be tolerated. So just to put that out there, I appreciate that very much. The structure, we have 4 presentations today. And I've looked at the abstracts and I know this is going to be a really interesting and insightful panel. Each presentation will be about 12, 13 minutes, roughly. We're going to aim for around there. Some maybe a little less, some a little more, but not to exceed 15 minutes. And we'd like to have 30 minutes or so for engagement and participation and just kind of conversation and questions at the end. Feel free, we're going to do questions at the end, but feel free, if questions occur to you, you can put them in the chat. And we have a very important person out there, Finn, who will be helping to manage and monitor that chat as we go along to streamline things when we get to the question and answer period. Okay. Without further ado, I'd like to just kind of get started here. The first on the agenda, we will have Alexander Belyakov. Alexander?
Thank you very much, Michael, for this great opportunity to speak at this virtual day of our conference. I would like to share my presentation. Do you see my slides now?
Yeah, yes.
Excellent. So I will be speaking about strategies and solutions for environmental crisis in Ukraine. As you know, it's a really serious ongoing crisis so far. And this crisis started actually not 2, but 10 years ago. And I highly appreciate that Environmental Peacebuilding Association did already a lot for Ukrainians and for environmental peacebuilding community to address this topic. And almost immediately after Russian invasion in 2022, Environmental Peacebuilding Association also distributed a letter for environmental peacebuilding community to regret about Russian invasion and offer some solutions. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank you everybody who distributed and signed this letter as well. So I would like to speak about understanding of this crisis, about tracking the conflict, and specific cases that are related to war casualties and risks in Ukraine and for whole region and the European continent and the world. One of the very controversial topics that is not appearing very often in the discussion, but is very important, is history of this conflict. I remember that some my colleagues even asked me how the war in Ukraine is different from the conflicts in other regions. And in this case, I would like to refer to the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances. What is really important about the Ukrainian case, Ukraine was nuclear weapon state in the past. And Ukraine voluntarily decided to give up all nuclear weapons as part of this Budapest Memorandum to Russia. And what is even more surprising right now, that Russia, as a key signatory of the Budapest Memorandum, betrayed the trust of Ukraine. And in even worse cases, started to use at least some military equipment from that nuclear weapons time to blackmail Ukraine with Ukrainian-owned weapons. So we have very complex international situation. And if you like to learn more about history of this conflict, it's really good to start with Mary Sarot's book, Not 1 Inch, where she stressed that we should have necessity of transparent and carefully negotiated agreements. So no one can blame each other like decades later what they discussed and how they agreed for this nuclear weapon transition. And what is even worse for the world, it's difficult right now to negotiate non-proliferation of nuclear weapons after everybody sees what happened with Ukraine. And it's really sad for international relations, not only Ukraine. Another issue that I recognized in coverage of this conflict, it's slightly different timeline of the war in Ukraine. You usually see in the mass media referrals to February 24th in 2022. But in the reality, this conflict started much earlier, and I would really refer to at least February 20th in 2014. At that time, the Russia became annexation of Crimea. And we also had very serious fightings in the Donbas region in eastern part of Ukraine for many years, and it still continue. So I really appreciate that many scientists in environmental peace building community are writing and researching about Ukraine. At the same time, I have seen that some young scientists, for example, do not mention Crimea or Donbass at all, and they start with uh, time frame from 2022. It's always good to remember the whole story of this war and about everything that's going on. Recently, I had opportunity to hear a speech of the Ukrainian President Zelensky during his stay in Germany, where he visited the German Parliament Bundestag yesterday, and he raised very important topic: how we can live with divided country. Europe already experienced similar things in the past after World War II, and divided Europe was never peaceful. The same story is about Germany. And as we see, this war opened a really difficult case for other conflicts. What will happen in case Ukraine will not agree to accept any land for peace treaties or something similar, what was also discussed? You see, Ukrainians already have case on conceding land like the Crimea in this case to aggressors, and the Crimea didn't stop Russia from invasion in 2022. It's important to understand any compromise with aggressors do not bring peace, and stronger response is needed to prevent future aggression. There are many war victims of this situation, and I just followed some official statistics from the UN officials, but as you can easily guess, such numbers are much, much higher. And what we also do not calculate properly is the large number of people who already are internally displaced people. And they have very difficult life right now. My family lived in Debaltseve in Donetsk region. You can see this map from Washington Post because in 2015 it was significant military fighting in this area, and for my mom and my younger brother in Ukraine, uh, it was the first time they have to leave Donbass to Kiev area. And in 2022, they became internally displaced persons to Western Ukraine and have to move again. And they still are in Ukraine and face all challenges as many other Ukrainians do. And what we see very often in the mass media do not correspond to all difficulties that Ukrainian people actually experience, even right now, because many of them, as you have seen at the previous slide, are still under attack. But not only people, nature is also a victim of this war. And Ukrainian authorities introduced the special article in the Criminal Code of Ukraine titled Ecocide to define crimes regarding nature. But at the same time, uh, we have even an international gap to address properly such problems. And what is important that Rome Statute should include the crime of ecocide and other issues. Uh, there are not so many options at this moment to properly solve such problem, but at least we see how international community trying hard to find solutions. And I would like to mention a peace formula for Ukraine that the President Zelensky created with support of variety of stakeholders, and his 10 points program includes also environmental damage. There are significant programs like Ukraine facility from the European Union, and there are some ongoing events like Ukraine Recovery Conference just yesterday and today, and we all hope for significant progress at Ukraine Peace Summit in Switzerland this week as well. So, what is important for scientists? Take a look at the environmental compact for Ukraine developed by high-level working group. It's already a significant roadmap with almost 50 recommendations, and there are other significant players like US partners, and there are possibilities to get even possible support for research, what is also important for scientists who are part of Environmental Peacebuilding Association. Nevertheless, about 30% of Ukraine are suffering from landmines, risks, and other issues. So we all need to deal with this. And one of the especially difficult topic are nuclear risks. And I am really glad that the Global Peace Summit in Switzerland will address nuclear safety and also food security. Surprisingly, this is one of my topics of expertise because I did research on food security risks after nuclear plant accidents already after the Crimea invasion of Russia. And I also presented about this topic at various forums, and I participated in diplomacy by networking, supported by the German Federal Government Foreign Office in Berlin and Brussels. And during such meetings, I discovered that even European countries, especially Germany, for example, are not so advanced in preparation to unfortunate nuclear plant accidents. And high military persons in Germany told me, you know, you have in Ukraine probably much better experience to prepare your population that we have here in Germany. So we all in Europe and around the globe need to consider all risks. If you are interested in this topic, I have a blog from Chernobyl to Fukushima.com when I address more in details. At the same time, since the war in Ukraine began, my blog experienced a lot of different virus attacks and other things. So it's recovered now, but I see how this topic became sensitive. And there are many other risks that we are highly underestimated. One of them is technological and industrial risk since Soviet time. Especially in Donbass region, there are no control for previous industrial nuclear sites, and we have case with a Unicommunar mine near Yinakiyev, where the Donetsk People Republic administration decided to flood the mine that was former part of the Soviet nuclear explosion program. And there are huge risks of radiological contamination in Ukraine itself, but also in the Azov Sea and potentially in whole region. As you know, Ukraine also suffers from environmental disasters like Kakhovka disaster. Damage to Ukrainian territory is enormous, but also we have many people who lost their lives and were displaced. Such crises like Kakhovka also affected climate change issues in Ukraine and even in Europe. So what Ukraine expects in this situation? Ruslan Strilets, who represents Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine, mentioned that they registered at least 5,000 incidents about environmental crimes, and damage just from such accidents is more than 56 billion euros. So Ukrainians are looking for opportunity to do something with this. And the topic of potential reparations and support for Ukraine is important. We also need to consider how sustainable development goals for Ukraine, Europe, and whole world can be completed under such circumstances. I really appreciate your attention, and I hope that we all are ready to find solutions. But also, we all need to understand that the war needs to finish first. If you have additional questions or requests for materials, feel free to connect with me at LinkedIn or simply send me email, and I will be happy to stay in touch. As Mahatma Gandhi said, the future depends on what we do in the present. And I really appreciate that the Environmental Peacebuilding Association does a lot to stop this conflict and provide at least academic support for this. Thank you very much.
Alexander, thanks very much for your presentation. Just to remind folks that we will, if you do have questions on Alexander's presentation, please put those in the chat and we can come back to those at the end. And I'll do my best to help to manage that the best we can. Next, we're going to turn to Maha Skah from the United Nations. And I'm going to turn it over to you right now. Go ahead. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you very much to the EPA for the invitation to brief in this panel. Also a pleasure to be able to tune in virtually this time around. Excellent. I see my presentation is already on the screen. Indeed, I work with the United Nations in the Department of Political Affairs and Peacebuilding in a team looking specifically at the linkages between climate change and peace and security. I just wanted to highlight that I'll be speaking on my personal capacity, and the idea is really to share some reflections of some of the work we've been doing, but this does not in any way represent the views of the United Nations or its member states. Some of you might be asking yourselves why the Department of Political Affairs and Peacebuilding is looking at this topic. And indeed, we are not climate or environmental experts, but political affairs experts. And the reason for that is that more than half, actually, of current United Nations field-based special political missions or peacekeeping operations are actually deployed in highly climate vulnerable countries. And this is not a coincidence. We hear from our colleagues working in these contexts that the missions are increasingly confronted with the growing implications of climate change on their work. And they find themselves increasingly having to incorporate climate impacts into some of their political analysis, early warning, prevention strategies, and even mediation and good offices. And also many situations on the agenda of the Security Council are an evidence of this dangerous confluence of climate and security risks. My presentation today for you was really aimed at giving you a perspective from the global level, headquarters level, looking at how different UN agencies are tackling this topic. I'll try to touch on the Security Council, the Peacebuilding Commission, and then also the role of other actors in this space. On the slide here, you see 4 UN entities, the Department of Political Affairs, Peacebuilding, the one I work at. There is also, on the right hand, UNDP, there is UNEP, and the Department of Peace Operations. And together, we have been since 2018 working on this cross-cutting issue of climate-related peace and security risks as part of this project called the Climate Security Mechanism. It's an interagency initiative, and the objective is to build the capacity of the UN system overall, but also of its member states, regional organizations, to better first understand the linkages, which are very complex. I'm sure the people on this call and also attending the conference are very well aware of the difficulty making sense of the linkages. It's not a causal effect. We don't say at all that climate change causes conflict. It just happens through different pathways, and it's the way we frame it is a conflict driver. It accentuates existing tensions. So this is a word on this climate security mechanism. I will be happy to share a few background material if that's useful for you, and also share the contact of colleagues working with us in this project. Next slide, please. I'm gonna, I think, skip the next 2 slides because this is just an overview of the different documents. Maybe a word on this conceptual framework. Yeah, sorry. Next. Yes, a word on this conceptual framework. This goes back to the way we conceptualize climate-related peace and security risks. We try to look at the shocks, the vulnerabilities, and of course, the coping capacities, looking at who is exposed, where and when, and it's looking at these 3 factors that allows us to really assess Of course, what we always say is that each context is distinct and specific. So there is no one-size-fits-all solution. There is not one single formula that's going to work for every single context. But this is just to guide some of our assessments. And I'll be happy to also share some of the work we've done in specific countries. The most recent one my team has worked on is Mauritania. And before that, Iraq. And now you can go to the next slide, please. Here you have a snapshot of what this climate security mechanism is really doing. I mentioned capacity building, but that is just one part of the activities. We also do obviously a lot of advocacy and convening, and New York is one of the, I think, most vocal areas where this discussion is happening. But it's not the only one, and member states, especially affected member states, are increasingly speaking up about the risks that they see and the support they need to be able to tackle these risks. So I'll go really fast on this slide, and we can go back to it if there's any questions. You can go to the next slide, please. Here you see a snapshot of the different initiatives that we have. So we deploy, when I mentioned capacity building, we deploy climate peace and security advisors to UN field missions, so peacekeeping and special political missions that either have a mandate or that are highly climate vulnerable. But we also support regional organizations, and through UNDP, we are able to deploy capacity in a number of regional organizations, such as the Lake Chad Basin Commission, the League of Arab States, Yiptako Gourma, and a few more are also coming. And then next slide, please. Now moving on to really what today's conversation is supposed to be about, and I'm mindful of time. I see I have 8 minutes left. This is really how the agenda has grown, the climate peace and security agenda, how we formulate it here in New York. In 2018, that's when the climate security mechanism was created. The group of friends on climate and security was also created. This is a gathering of member states that wish to put this topic front and center on the agenda. There is also a gathering or an informal group at the Security Council called the Informal Expert Group of members of the Security Council. It's called like that because not all members of the Security Council are supportive of this agenda, and we can go back to that in the next slides. And basically what this slide shows is that we've started small, we've been doing a lot of advocacy about the risks in the past. And then we've been doing a lot of analysis of trying to map the risks and what is it that we can do. And we're slightly moving to the solution side. And part of the solution is peace building, because climate action and peace building, from our sense, share a lot of the same objectives, and we can do both at the same time. Next slide, please. Now, here's just a quick background on the UN Security Council's involvement on this agenda. So in the past, the Council was mainly interested in the security implications of extractive resources, namely timber and certain minerals. But it's not until 2007 that the first discussion on this topic happened in the Council. This was following the influential Stern report on the economics of climate change. And then after this, it took another 4 years for the Security Council to return to the topic, this time in an open debate that was initiated by Germany. And on this occasion, a presidential statement was adopted. Presidential statement means that all members, all 15 members of the Council agree to it. And since then, the Council has met on many occasions to discuss this. And this has signaled, of course, growing awareness of the risks, and of course, the impacts of climate change are only increasing. So it's unfortunately contributing to the growing momentum of the topic. And then in 2021, a draft resolution was tabled by Niger and Ireland and was put to a vote in the Security Council. But the resolution was not adopted due to a veto by a permanent member state. However, this, and just to explain what a thematic resolution would have meant, it would have meant that the Council would have made climate change an agenda item, or would have looked at the implications of climate change in all the matters on its agenda. However, it was not passed, and this despite the resolution being co-sponsored by 113 member states. Co-sponsorship means that countries, even those that do not sit on the Security Council, have signed off the resolution and expressed their support for it. And this is, in fact, the second highest number of co-sponsorships in the Council following the Ebola resolution. And we heard that this number could have been much higher if the window to sign was not that short. It was essentially in one weekend. And this just to say that there is broad support across the membership. And however, the resolution did not pass. It was so Russia voted against, India voted also against, and China abstained at the time. What would this resolution have done? It would have asked the Secretary General of the United Nations to submit a report on the security implications of climate change. It would have asked the SG to appoint a special representative who would be responsible for coordinating the UN's efforts on this file. And of course, also advocate and exchange information on the threats with the UN system and external actors. And as you can imagine, because this topic is so broad, a lot of UN entities are involved, and coordination is actually a big chunk of our work. And finally, this resolution would have asked to identify relevant field missions where additional capacity is needed to lead this work. However, despite the veto of this resolution, the Council has continued to focus on climate peace and security in a number of context-specific areas. The support inside the Council has continued because, like I mentioned, there is this informal expert group of members of the Council, and a lot of current members have indicated that they wish to focus on this as part of their priorities in the Security Council. A lot, actually, of these countries are also non-permanent members. For example, the Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, Albania, Japan, Malta previously. So this is just for background on the Security Council. Then next slide, please. And I see, Sherry, you have your hand up. Is that because I'm out of time? Should I try to wrap up?
Maha, you have a couple minutes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So here you can see the different missions that have in their mandate by the Security Council a recognition of the security implications of climate change. So far, we have 5 special political missions, or previous ones, some of them have closed down, and 5 peacekeeping operations. I will not go into detail, but we can discuss this later. And then maybe one word on what's happening outside of the Security Council. For that, can you please go to the next slide? Let's skip that. This was just on the mandate, what mandate means, but we can also go back to that later. So outside the council, like I said, momentum is growing. There's this the wide group of friends, which has now grown to 70 member states and keeps growing. We have new member states joining as of last month. Then next slide, please. This is the Peacebuilding Fund, which is also increasingly investing in climate, peace, and security, with around 130 million invested in recent years. And what the fund does is it acts as a conversation starter. It can help bring large climate funds later, after the fund has invested in some of the most difficult or fragile settings. And the fund, for those who don't know it, it's a fund to support peace-building opportunities, and in many areas, these have a natural or a component linked to natural resources. So some of the work we do is also providing advice on these projects and trying to connect the dots with our missions, but also the partners we have in regional and countries. And finally, for the next slide, please, I'll speak on the new agenda for peace. Basically, this was a document submitted by the Secretary General of the UN for member states' deliberation. And it was an opportunity to reaffirm existing commitments, including the SDGs, the UN Charter, and to help move towards a reinvigorated multilateral system. And in this policy brief, climate, peace, and security was high on the agenda, and it made a certain number of recommendations, namely to make this a political priority and to strengthen the connections between multilateral bodies, but also the climate action and peace-building communities. You can access the document, it's online, so I'm happy to share a few links in the chat after my intervention. I'll stop here and happy to take questions later on. Thank you so much.
All right. Maha, thank you very much for your presentation. Again, to remind folks that we will have time at the end for questions and discussion. Feel free to put any questions in the chat. Okay. Next, we're going to turn to Shanna McClain from NASA. And all right, Shanna, thank you.
Okay, are you seeing everything clearly?
Looks good.
Perfect, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to be here with, well, virtually at least, with all of you today. Thanks to the Environmental Peacebuilding Association for this event, and also to Michael for leading our session today. It's gone quite seamlessly so far, luckily. And so my name is Shanna McClain. I'm the Disasters Program Manager for NASA's Earth Sciences Division. And today I'm presenting on migration with dignity as a strategy for promoting resilience and managing conflict. And so the presentation that I'm giving is part of a longstanding collaboration and partnership that I've had with Carl Brook from the Environmental Law Institute. And a lot of the work building up to today's presentation has been completed in collaboration with a number of partners, including IOM and Dignity Rights International, as well as receiving support from Ocean Policy Research Institute and the U.S. Institute of Peace. And I'll also mention that one of the reasons you see involvement from me in my role at NASA is that we have extensive capabilities for observing our changing natural resources and our changing Earth. And our goal is to eventually, continue to expand this work to ideally include how we can better integrate Earth science into our policy approaches for conflict prevention and resilience. And so just to start off, I wanted to open with a few points on the state of migration. Firstly, I would say we largely understand that migration is increasing, right? And the number of major migration events where hundreds and sometimes thousands of people are moving for various reasons, largely due to escalating conflict or insecurity challenges, are on the rise. These events can lead to significant hardship, trauma, and loss of life. And this includes, of course, those that are displaced from conflicts that we're seeing around the world in Ukraine and Gaza, as well as those across Syria, Yemen, the DRC, Sudan, and many others. Much of human mobility is driven by the changing state of our environment and natural resources. And this can include overconsumption and overproduction that's linked to unsustainable economic growth, as well as resource depletion or degradation, biodiversity collapse, and climate change. And we're also seeing a rise in anti-immigrant sentiment being seen across the world, especially in areas that are experiencing worsening economic conditions as a result of those deteriorating natural resources. And this depletion of resources is further driving mobility, and it's having spillover effects into swelling conflict as resources become increasingly strained. IOM recently released their 2024 Global Migration Report, and within it, it indicated that we're currently witnessing unthinkable conflict in terms of scale and nature than we've previously experienced. And while these issues playing out before us and the clear connections between migration, conflict, and environmental change are obvious, we also often fail to address just how ill-equipped the current international legal and policy frameworks are for governing and managing the growing number of people on the move. And so while the points that I just reflected are broadly speaking about the state of migration, what we seek to do is really focus more on human-centered approaches to what it means to migrate, so that we can use this as a mechanism towards reducing conflict, building peace, and moving towards resilience. And so in order to do this, we must better understand the multiple pathways for migration. We know people are moving in planned circumstances, although that's quite rare. More are moving in the sphere of unplanned movement, and others definitely on the forced migration, forced movement, forced displacement sphere. Yet across these different pathways, migration continues to be an adaptive solution for individuals and families around the world. We know that migration is multifactorial, so there are multiple reasons why people are moving. It can also be nonlinear, meaning that people can experience multiple starting and stopping points along their journey. It's also complex. There are multiple vulnerabilities that are experienced by migrants as they move. And because of this, it's very important to understand what the individuals are experiencing instead of treating, these groups as all of the same, or, in some of the ways that we've seen the governance approaches playing out. When we have spoken, our team and our colleagues have spoken with different groups about why people are moving, why they've decided to move, or why they have moved. We receive multiple reasons. They largely pool around ideas of seeking improved education, employment opportunities, and access to healthcare and general improvement of their well-being. But there are multiple other reasons that come about as well. And though this often leads to planned and unplanned migration, we're also increasingly seeing climate change driving the forced movement of populations as a result of slow and sudden onset events. So we're talking, in some cases about short-term mobility that's more linked to forced movement because of floods or cyclones where people eventually move back. Or longer-term migration where food insecurity or longer-term security issues are leading to impacts on livelihoods, such as agrarian communities or other resource-dependent livelihoods. And so given all of these complex factors, the state of migration, as well as what it means to be moving in the different context of movement, it's increasingly important to enable migrants to have greater control and ownership over the decision to move or to remain. And so, as mentioned earlier, while people are moving, they face numerous threats to their safety, their security. There are multiple violations to both their human and their dignity rights. This can include becoming victims of sexual violence, exploitation, abduction, extortion. But it can also include things that are a little bit more pernicious, yet more silent. The role that missing documentation can play in their identity, for example, or the sheer lack of information that's provided to people that helps them understand how to navigate a path forward. And so, because we believe mobility is an inherent human right and should be considered a dynamic process, we are trying to support migration being increasingly recognized as a positive and empowering experience for many, even though there's a clear lack of human rights-based migration governance at global and national levels, which is leading to these routine violations of rights that I identified. And so, drawing upon a range of existing human and dignity rights that aren't really working together in a holistic manner, but appear in various laws and policies around the world, we've brought these together to form our Migration with Dignity framework, which emphasizes 6 fundamental elements. And so this includes freedom of movement, the right to choose whether and when to leave, whether and when to return, and the right to stay. It also includes equality, the right to be treated as a human being of equal worth, including non-discriminatory access to benefits, services, and legal protections. Security, the right to be free from sexual violence, including rape, sexual exploitation, human trafficking, slavery, forced labor, and arbitrary and abusive detention, as well as standard of living, having access to adequate, food, water, and shelter, access to services, including healthcare, education, and legal services, and civil and political rights that include freedom of speech, religion, assembly, and political participation. The denial of basic rights and services such as employment, housing, social services, job opportunities, etc., occur when one is denied, these elements that help form or comprise our identity. And people without national identities become even more vulnerable to mistreatment and discrimination, often living in legal limbo. So these issues have disproportionate impacts, not just across different rights that are being violated as people move, but also across different marginalized groups who are moving as well. And so this includes better understanding how these different rights play out across women and children, individuals that have different sexual or gender orientations, as well as those with disabilities. And so the Migration with Dignity framework that we've developed presents a novel approach to addressing migration that has the potential to promote conflict prevention. Specifically, it can prevent and reduce conflicts related to climate change and migration in both home communities before migration occurs, which can reduce the amount of people needing to or electing to move, but also in host communities after migration as well. And this is done in a variety of ways. First, it helps extend the discussion around migration beyond just freedom of movement to help improve situation in home and host communities. Freedom of movement is largely, one of the hairier context here, right? The ability to cross state or country lines, whether and when people move. But this is about more than just that. We want to be able to create situations or improve situations in home and host communities that may otherwise escalate into conflict. Our framework also expands the focus beyond just migrants, for example, to include host communities so that we focus on equipping migrants with knowledge and skill sets that enable them to build a life that's equal to or better than the one they're leaving behind. And in this regard, the framework seeks to prepare host populations to support and engage migrants over the longer term. The framework can also foster conditions that increase local and individual security by raising the opportunity cost of conflict. So, for example, while migration increases demand for services and natural resources, or it certainly can, in a host community, whether this stress leads directly to conflict will largely depend on how the host community adapts to mobilizing or reallocating resources. This enables us to also simultaneously extend the time period of migration, as well as reduce the flow of migration for the host community to more effectively absorb migrants by facilitating a steadier stream of movement, because people are enabled to move on their own terms. And then finally, it can extend the timeline of interventions in order to enable conflict prevention by acknowledging that migration is dynamic and multi-causal, and it can then therefore enable temporary migration as a strategy to relieve pressure and alleviate tensions before conflict emerges. And so finally, by supporting conflict prevention across these various approaches, over time, the Migration with Dignity framework can provide a pathway to resilience. There's a strong correlation between elective migration and positive advancement or betterment of individuals. And our framework focuses on adopting interventions that address social inclusion and accessibility and ensures that migrants have necessary skills, education, and vocational support, which directly strengthens coping capacity and resilience outcomes. And so finally, our framework compels policymakers to consider and address the root causes of conflict throughout the migration cycle or process so that migrants are able to more productively contribute to their situation. This combination of strength and security and reduced fragility while promoting peaceful migration enables a clear pathway for resilience. And I think at this point, I'll stop here and thank you for your time and turn it back over to Michael.
All right. Thanks very much, Shanna. Okay, last but not least, our final presentation for the day, and then we can open it up to questions and discussion. Maciej Bukowski, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Just give me a second to share the screen.
Yep.
And okay, you should see now.
All set.
All right. Thank you very much for this kind of invitation. My presentation is basically based on a paper that I published last December with Journal of Environmental Management, in which I have a look at the notion, at a proposal of sorts that is the following: that climate change constitutes the sort of global threats in the international realm that is one of the type that states need to address collectively, while all the same time dealing with their geopolitical rivalries, which are unlikely to go away even if the planet gets much hotter. This is because empirically there is simply, it's the point I'm trying to make, and no empirical evidence from the past saying that it should go otherwise. We have faced as a species in the past different plagues and different dangers that were existential in nature, and never for a moment have we stopped our rivalries between the states, nations, and societies. And so we should, for the sake of preserving climate action, come up with a sort of a framework to govern the progress of climate action. And my proposal is to, well, certainly not a silver bullet, to use, or rather to apply a theory that has already proven its worth in the field of international policymaking, that is the Nash equilibrium, a major cornerstone concept from the game theory, which you perhaps may remember not least from the beautiful 1997 movie, The Beautiful Mind, about John Nash, who was at the time in the US at the university trying to coin this new theory. Now, perhaps a little bit also about my background. I think I have missed that at the beginning. I am a former international dispute lawyer turned climate geek expert of sorts. I advised the Polish Ministry of Climate and Environment for a couple of years before moving to the Polish Development Bank, and I'm also an expert and a fellow at a bunch of different institutions in Poland and the US, such as Center for European Policy Analysis, International Republican Institute, Aspen Institute, and such. And so without further ado, maybe I'll just focus for the little time we have on making the 3 points I tried to hammer in my presentation. And so basically, as a starter, of course, the introduction and what the national equilibrium really is. So essentially, we are talking about a cornerstone of Gear 3, one that asserts that, in simple terms, that no player is in a given game will ever regret their choice, given the simultaneous choices of other players. So basically, this principle forms the foundation for determining optimal actions in situations involving multiple stakeholders. And the underlying premise of this Nash model is actually pretty straightforward. So if each player in a certain game chooses their strategy based on what has happened so far in that game, and no other player can improve their expected outcome by changing their strategy, while other players keep their strategies unchanged, then the resulting set of strategies is a Nash equilibrium. And so essentially, in a Nash equilibrium, each player makes an optimal choice by considering the decisions of the other players. And the Nash equilibrium actually has already proven valuable across various domains where multiple stakeholders interact, particularly in international relations. Having found applications in international trade, arms control, environmental policy, taxation, healthcare, and many others. And while it has already proven its worth in the past in IR, it has not really been applied thoroughly in the field of geopolitics. And to understand why this is the case, it's actually kind of crucial, I think, to sort of at least superficially delve into the differences between what is the notion of AR and what is the notion of geopolitics. And I think I will not reinvent the wheel if I simply say that IR primarily revolves around theoretical conceptualizations of relations between states, which aim to conceive desirable outcomes in the real world. So the core concept dominating AR is sovereignty, of course, which traditionally focused on retaining sovereign state powers. But then, more recently, in the last decades, there was modern IR theories, which we haven't the time really now to list them, have sort of evolved to include, non-sovereign entities such as unrecognized polities, transnational terrorist networks, international organizations, and multinational corporations. And this evolution has sort of allowed IR theories to adapt more freely to changing political landscapes. But still, the contrast, I'll say in a minute, between IR and geopolitics is that geopolitics inherently practical rather than theoretical, emphasizing the ultimate significance of the physical and the real over the theoretical and the abstract in shaping political reality. And what I'm trying to sort of reveal in my paper is that while geopolitics may not have yet been as such a place in which the Nash equilibrium and game theory more broadly, because there are other concepts in game theory that could be relevant here as well, have not yet been applied to, they could be at the intersection of climate change and geopolitics. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So geopolitics basically operates on the promise that geography is the most crucial factor influencing political actions across time and space. Essentially, geopolitics as a notion as such, if you were to, I think, reduce this to a single phrase, and definitions, there are many, would be that it's an interplay of political forces within the constraints of physical space, right? And it's a sort of a self-restraining assumption that underpins all geopolitical theories, making geography the common denominator in geopolitical analysis. And although the emergence of a newer notion that is all close to you, of the Anthropocene, and then, of course, the climate change itself sort of challenges the immovability of geography, which is that core assumption that remains central to geopolitics, because we know that already climate change itself, and for its various direct and indirect effects, actually changes geography. For many centuries, geography was seen by decision makers as a given, that it just is, and we have certain variabilities throughout the year, which result from the fact that climate adapts to different cycles and so on. Now it's a whole different skin in the game, because we are seeing entire geographies that haven't for even thousands of years, or at least insofar as the human polities have been growing, that they are changing, they are evolving. And for that reason, the geography is no longer a given for geopoliticians. It's shifting sand of sorts. And in any case, in the international realm, actions of states need always to consider geographical limitations, but the size and shapes of these limits, again, now are in different ways, and then different spheres are changing. But in any way, geopolitics is viewed as a power game that is driven by those geographical constraints, whereas IR encompasses broader relational configurations between states and other international entities. And while IR aims to envisage, let's say, sustainable pathways for optimal relations among international actors, geopolitics focuses on how sovereign states realize their interests within a predefined physical space. And so therefore, both fields are not mutually exclusive, but possess different functions. And the significant difference here, however, is that each field perceives physical reality differently, or rather gives them different weights. And while geopolitics views political actions through the lens of actual physical geography, IR theories do not necessarily require this perspective, which is why being more abstract and theoretical, in a sense that as far as the Nash equilibrium, for instance, is concerned, it was always much more easier to consider the stakeholder behavior in a theoretical, abstract environment, rather than the one that is constrained by certain elements that are predetermining the configuration that exists on the ground, like in geopolitics. So here's the major difference, and what, in my view, the reason why the Nash equilibrium has thus far not really been successful in the fields of geopolitics. However, maybe let's just speed up a tiny bit. Yeah, let's just stay here for a second, and then I'll dive into a few very specific examples, because why so much theory if we're not illustrating it on the basis of actual illustrations? So the intersection of climate change and geopolitics presents a unique scenario, in my view, where the Nash equilibrium may indeed become increasingly relevant, because climate change challenges the traditional assumption of immovable geography, like we said, introduces unpredictable changes such as rising sea level, desertification, extreme weather events, and these changes have significant applications, of course, for human activities, geopolitical dynamics, supply chains, and so on and so forth. And while historically geopolitical rivalries and theories assumed that, like we said, the geography is a constant, now it no longer is the case, and that unpredictability of climate change effects compels then states to account for these changes in their geopolitical strategies, making cooperative strategies and models like Nash equilibrium more pertinent. And so, in practical terms, this means that states must now navigate a more complex geopolitical landscape. They must consider not only the direct effects of climate change on the geography, but also the indirect impacts on other states and the global system. And this whole complexity requires an exponential increase, let's say, in computational capacities, systematic efforts to integrate climate change consideration, geopolitical planning, and so on and so forth. And even in an ideal scenario where states possess the tools to fully accommodate climate change effects, I consider this in my paper, let's say the sheer complexity and cost of this effort make it challenging. And so geopolitical rewards from exploiting climate change effects, as it at times already happens now today, is challenging and may be offset by the associated risks and costs. And therefore, the national equilibrium becomes a valuable tool in explaining state behaviors and informing climate policy. And now, for maybe 2 more minutes, I have 8 specific illustrations, which I'll try to run through real quick. And the first one, I think, is the most far-fetched and the most difficult, which is why I laid it out first. It's the one that concerns international climate agreements, because basically what I just tried to lay out is that that it is optimal for states to seek that balance, whereas we try to progress all together, and not everyone leaves or that only adapts their position if others do. If others don't, then they do not change the positions heretofore adopted. And so for international climate agreements, for instance, the national equilibrium would mean, for instance, that each state chooses their level of emission reductions considering the choices of others. And an equilibrium would happen if it is reached when no state can benefit by changing their strategy unilaterally. So for instance, ideally, it's hard to conceive today, but maybe it's becoming more feasible. The US, China, and the US would find a balance where each reduces emission to a level that minimizes global warming while maintaining economic stability. So basically, both priorities are met, but all stakeholders or the major stakeholders involved. Now, another example would be the carbon pricing and trade policies. State set carbon prices or trade policies like the ETS or other mechanisms to incentivize carbon pricing and trading. And an equilibrium would then be reached, for instance, when states set the policies that so that no one can gain by altering their carbon price unilaterally. This is the holy grail of carbon pricing that is only slowly and gradually seeing the day, given how different pricing regimes develop regionally as opposed to a global market. Now, another example could be perhaps in terms of the renewable energy development, where each state, of course, determines their level of investment by considering the investments of others, and an equilibrium here would be reached when no other states benefits from changing their investment strategy unilaterally. For instance, some states invest in renewables, others might follow suit in order not to be falling behind the technological advancement and to benefit from the collective reduction in fossil fuel dependency, because let's not forget, the climate action, or the decarbonization, should I say, is not only mandated by the requirements of the climate crisis, but also by the will of states to become energy independent from the supplies of hydrocarbons. The fact that new dependencies are taking their place because of the requirements of green technologies is a different story, but this is basically the broader landscape. I know my time is up, so just give me 30 seconds to really quick go through 2 more examples. Climate adaptation strategies, for instance, where states shared a river basin and they could coordinate on water management practices to ensure optimal resource allocation and disaster preparedness, or technological innovation transfer, for instance, where developed states might invest in clean technology and share it with developing states, ensuring that the global benefits of emission reductions are maximized and no country feels left out or left behind. One perhaps illustration of that could be the fact that the Japanese have liberated or freed their hydrogen patents last year, so as to because they were so much ahead of the game in terms of technology that they needed to make them freely available for other countries to catch up. Deforestation and land use policies. Similarly, for instance, Brazil and Indonesia could coordinate their deforestation policies to prevent competitive deforestation, right? And ensure that global carbon sinks are preserved without undermining each other's interests. Climate-related migration and security. Migration already mentioned today. And for instance, states in the region prone to climate-induced displacement might coordinate on migration policies to ensure the right approach to managing climate refugees, reducing the risks. Also, similarly, in the corporate and financial sector regulations, increasingly relevant, given how much climate finance is lagging behind its self-set goals. And so, for instance, if the US imposes strict environmental ESG criteria on financial institutions, other centers, well, I mentioned New York and Tokyo here, but perhaps we should mention rather those in the global south, could adopt similar standards to attract the sustainable investments. These are some very basic illustrations of a quite complex idea. So I think it was quite quite a struggle for me in 15 minutes, 60 minutes to actually sort of present this to you in a comprehensive way. But I'll be happy to take any questions if you have any, and yeah, take it further. Thank you.
Right, Maciej, thank you very much for that presentation. We now have time for some questions. We will try to get as many in as we can in our allotted time. We probably have two ways of doing this. One would be to type any questions into the Q&A feature or the chat feature. The other would be to raise your hand and we can call on you for any questions. How's that sound to everyone out there? Good? Okay. All right. Let's see. I do have a question or two here in the chat. We can start with that. Actually, this first one I'm seeing here looks like to Shanna about your particular presentation in Migration with Dignity. And if I'm trying to get this right, but if migration here is about enhancing freedom, if the migration is only temporary, if the migration is only temporary, is that a contradiction? And is that, I guess, really kind of enhancing freedom over the longer term?
Thank you. So the truth, right, is that migration is blended in its approach, right? Some migration is temporary, some is permanent. The ways that people move are internal, international. There's mixed migration. So the work that we're doing is not specifically about, you know, changing the nature of how people move, but rather equipping them with the, you know, the types of skill sets and the access to different rights and protections that enable them to have greater control over the way they move, so that maybe instead of it being so unplanned, it gives them the ability, you know, to have greater intention or to understand, you know, what they can access as a result of the move that they're making, whether it's temporary, permanent, unplanned, planned, forced, etc. And so I don't see it as a contradiction. What we would like to see, though, is that a lot of policies are really focused on, you know, on diffusing tensions around migration coming into countries when in fact there are a lot of benefits around it, but we need to be able to focus on getting people the skill sets and opportunities made available so that they can, you know, become part of, you know, the communities that they're working in. And so the goal is ultimately to focus on a more human rights based approach and to enable those types of freedoms as it relates to our framework. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you, Shanna. Okay, any other questions? Please raise hand. Please put in the chat. Let's see, I'm looking in here. We do have one for Maha. Does the UN Climate Security Mechanism also plan to expand its activities to include other countries, including in European, Eastern European, North American contexts, and a forward-looking approach?
Thank you, Michael. That's actually a very pertinent question, because we've said many times that for us, this agenda is global. It's not only relevant for Africa or Asia. However, we need to prioritize. We're in a very budget constrained situation at the UN, and usually the decision of where to support or where to build capacity is taken by a variety of actors, of course, where we have a mandate by the Security Council that helps kind of put it on the spotlight, so to say. But I had another question that was asked to me bilaterally, which is, do we work with regional organizations? And indeed, that is a way that the climate security mechanism and overall UN system works with countries and communities all around the world. So to give you an example, on the EU has recently adopted a joint communication on climate change and security. Let me look at the exact spelling of this communique, but basically what it does is to recognize the linkages, but also commit to deploying environmental advisors to EU military and civilian missions. And in that respect, we're working very closely with the EU, connecting our UN colleagues with the EU. And then we, in our regional offices, be it in Central Africa or West Africa or the Horn of Africa, we're working with the regional economic communities there, UNOWAS, ECAS, and IGAD. We're also involved in conducting assessment for ASEAN. So the idea, just to say, is it's a global agenda. It's not focused solely on the global south, but we need to prioritize. And as you can imagine, the climate security mechanism is composed of 4 entities, and decisions are made by consensus. So a lot of other considerations are, of course, need to be taken in consideration before deciding on where to deploy. I hope I answered your question. Thank you. Back over to you, Michael.
Great, thank you. Any other questions out there? I think I see one maybe here. Okay, this is again directed at Maha. Could you please tell us how we could get involved in the UN climate security mechanism as someone who works at an INGO focused on peace and security? You are muted, Maha.
Sorry. I said, absolutely, I'll put my email in the chat and feel free to email me. Like I said, what we do is often connecting the dots. So if we have colleagues active in the region or in the place where you are, we'll make sure to put you in touch with them. And then like I said, we work on knowledge products and try to be a thought leader on this topic. And so there's often calls for consultancies or research opportunities with us. I've also shared the link to our Trello board, which has all of this. So you'll find job opportunities, consultancies, etc. in this field. And feel free to also send them to us so we can put them online, because we have this community of practice of over 400 colleagues interested in the linkages between climate change and peace and security. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Keep those questions coming. Definitely feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions. I have one for, I guess, maybe all people on the panel here, is what comes through in all these presentations is the importance of international organizations, whether it's the UN, whether it's whatever it might be. And I guess my question would be for you all, are international organizations capable as currently configured to address some of these challenges that have come up in today's conversation dealing with environmental peace building? These are massive challenges, and we're putting a lot of faith in the UN and other international organizations. So whoever wants to take that one on.
Michael, I can address this using example from my previous experience. I worked 3 years with United Nations Environment Program in Montreal, and one of the project at the Convention of Biological Diversity was dedicated to similar issues. It was called Peace and Biodiversity Dialogue Initiative. This project was initiated by donors from Republic of Korea and was very successful, helping to create peace parks. And peace parks are a very important topic. If we go back to the example of Ukraine, we have in Ukraine at least 30% of the territory that is impossible to use because of landmines at the moment. Ukraine remains the most contaminated by landmines mines country. And you cannot immediately integrate such complex territories in life. And we have examples in Europe and in many other countries of so-called military territories or military parks. So such territories are not immediately integrated in agriculture, for example, but they have transition period, and such protected areas are very helpful to slowly introduce agriculture or other industrial needs there. And peace parks are actually very good solutions for countries that experience conflict and need transition fast. I believe such initiatives will be really helpful. And as one of the founding members of Environmental Peacebuilding Association, I really hope that it will be more research and activities done in such directions, also in cooperation with international organizations.
Thanks, Alexander. Yeah. Anyone else want to?
I can add, Michael. So, I think some of the complexities that are reflected in what I presented on are, there's environmental degradation and climate change and conflict, and then we've got these different components about, building the skills and efficiencies and also the protections for individuals because of these different changing contexts and environments. And so I would say what we need to be doing is looking at how to better integrate across organizations, right? Because there's no single entity ever that will address all of these things by themselves. And so our ability to really build bridges, form partnerships, find, I think, improved solutions for collaborating and addressing these issues is what's needed. I think that there's a lot that's done in order to bring different groups together, but there's so much complexity with just unpacking simple elements of what we've discussed, that now more than ever, I think the ability to come together and really network and identify how to address these complexities systemically is something that's going to be, the bigger challenge for us to address.
You allow me to hop in, Michael,
Yeah.
as the devil's advocate, actually, I think, I'm afraid. The thing is, we all bring different sort of backgrounds and expertise, and by experience, and of experience, I mean also the experience we bring from dealing with all these organizations. Myself, I happen to have worked before with IOs as a lawyer, and then later from the international perspective and as a ministry, now at another national institution, in various roles, various think tanks and so on. And basically my experience thus far has been, or rather sort of reality check, which I believe this entire conversation that stems far beyond our virtual room here, is that it needs a reality check of sorts, because IOs are what they are. They are international organizations, meaning that they are international in nature, and they are brought to existence for the consensus of those countries that want them to fulfill a certain mission. And so that's the theory. The practice is that every one of those organizations has its own power dynamic within it, that revolves not least around which country pays most for the budget of the institution. What are the nationalities of people working with the? What are the agendas? What are the agendas of the countries that pay those tickets and so on and so forth? And I have seen already a bunch of times when certain organizations that have a certain nominally very, let's say, high that nominally they are meant to pursue a certain mission that is wide in mandates and high ambition, but oftentimes that ambition fizzles out because of those conflicts that result in the hindering of the fulfilling of such mission that revolves oftentimes precisely around how certain states that have put that organization into existence in the first place, how they themselves view the mandates of those organizations. And I think oftentimes the problems about the inefficiencies of this or that organization, I mean, there's so much talk about how the UN is inefficient, how this is inefficient, how the EU is inefficient, and so on and so forth. It actually, at the very end of the day, oftentimes boils down not to the problems within the organization, but outside of it. And what are the major stakeholders, the sort of guarantors of the prosperity of a given organization, how they view those things? Because for an international organization to keep its existence in place, its mandate needs to be upheld. But those that that are paying for it, any IO can cease to exist any day if the state that put into place agreed so. So that's external, I think, perspective about the efficiencies that what to do about them, I think, is something that is certainly crucial as we move into, let's say, the next chapter of climate negotiations, which is one that will be above all underpinned by significant different geopolitical fractions. That's just my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. Maha, you want to take a stab at that, and then we'll have to wrap things up, but go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to react on what Shanna and Maciej said. Very much agree with you, Shanna, that we need to mainstream. We cannot do everything at the same time, like the movie Everywhere all at once. And therefore, to be able to have maximum impact, we need to be able to mainstream climate, peace, and security into not just the regional offices, but into the regular activities of the mission. And one agenda that I think about is gender, WPS agenda, the Women, Peace and Security. In the beginning, it was perceived as this separate agenda item, but over time, I think a lot of be it IOs, but also policymakers more broadly have come to accept that this is just part and parcel of their work. This was one thing. And then on the question you raised, whether it is really only IOs, my sense is that they have perhaps the ability to elevate some of the discourse, but in the end, we're here to serve the communities. And the communities have, in many instances, a lot of the solutions already. They just need some help to scale it up. And in the report that I shared with you on the activities of the Peacebuilding Fund, and the different projects that are undertaken that have a component of either tackling climate change or environmental degradation, working with CSO, civil society organizations, women's groups, bringing in youth, all of these aspects can help not just mainstream, but have a lasting impact, because it's also not just about scoring points right now. This is an evolving field and a very, like it's outlined, complex international system. So yeah, I think all of these factors that my other panelists have raised are very, very pertinent. I'll stop here. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, everybody. Unfortunately, we have to bring this to a close. We could talk all day. I would love to talk all day. But I'd like to thank our panelists and for being here and presenting your papers and presenting your perspectives. I want to thank the audience out there for tuning in. And also thanks everyone for your support.
Should we
Thanks,
smile one more
everyone.
time for a
Hold
picture?
1 second. No, thanks everyone for your support of the International, or the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. I guess someone's gonna take a picture now, but, okay. All right.
Done.
Thank you, everybody. Hope you got it.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks so much. Take care.
Good
Thank
day.
you.
Bye-bye.
Excellent
Thank you.
job.
Thank you guys. Bye bye.